Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., where late spring has turned already into summer. We've got a real scorcher going outside, temperatures in the 90s for the second day in a row. Some of these are all-time records in various locations. So it's the beginning of a long, hot summer. And even though we know winter is coming for the regime, in the meantime, it's a long, hot summer. Now, during the course of this week, and we will try to assemble the various components of this sea change, we've experienced something which has been, of course, latent and ongoing and prominent, right? The question of this credibility gap. How much lying can you get away with, right? When will people realize that if you lie, you're probably serving the father of lies? And this then opens a new crisis front for the current regime. Now, some of this has to do with the coming of Rudy Giuliani, and we want to pay careful attention to the psychological dynamics, right? The affective and psychological elements in Rudy Giuliani's effort. Remember, Giuliani is somebody who was pushed out of the Trump inner circle after the election, right? He wanted to be Secretary of State. The answer was no. He wanted to be, Trump offered him, Rudy claims anyway, that Trump offered him the post of Attorney General. No, said Rudy. He was bitter. And now he's back. And the notion seems to be a man inebriated with so much sudden notoriety. He's drunk with unaccustomed attention. He's too comfortable on the set. He's beginning to blab. He's beginning to imitate the style of free association of his boss, of the principal. In other words, a relatively similar mentality between the man, Giuliani, and the master, Trump. And this looks like a manic combination. It looks like two mentalities that when they resonate together, that begins to go off the rails. He's a showboater, we're told. Today he was forced to issue a correction, really a retraction of some of the stuff that he had been saying about the famous Stormy Daniels case. And we'll go through some of that, right? What Rudy had to say in that infamous interview with Sean Hannity. But the idea is a real psychodrama now occurring in the person of Giuliani. He thinks he's the comeback kid. How long will it last? Will it be another Moochie exercise? Scaramucci the Mooch didn't last for much more than 10 or 11 days. What's going to be Rudy's story? And how long before he clashes with these relatively staid and controlled individuals like Emmett Flood, right? These people, they all have the aspect of elitist stoics, right? They sort of have to be. But of course, with Rudy, you've got the cult of Dionysios in the foreground, right? Whereas these other lawyers want to represent the cult of Apollo in the background, right? It's all very controlled. Now, as far as Trump is concerned, the leaks last week designed to weaken Kelly are also leaks that weaken Trump. Kelly, of course, is not the first one to disparage Trump. Tillerson had called Trump a moron and refused to deny it. McMaster, also departed, called Trump an idiot, a dope, with the mentality of a kindergartner. These are people that worked with him every day, in particular McMaster. Gary Cohen called him dumb as blankety blank. Priebus and Mnuchin agreed that it was an idiot. Kelly also called him an idiot, and then later on was reported to have called him unhinged. Unhinged. And we'll comment at the end of the show on new interest in popular culture in the dynamics of the 25th Amendment. So the big news this week, the big headline from the ill-starred appearance of Rudy on the Sean Hannity show was that after months of denials and after legal maneuverings and many, many reputations put on the line, including the hapless and feckless Madame Hucksterby Sanders, that yes, Don did pay Stormy Daniels, and he did it through funneling money through a law firm. This does not look good. What kinds of federal financial laws are going to be in play here before we know it? But somehow we've got to retreat, right? Those of us who try to follow these things from day to day, retreat now, or get distance, if you will. Go out there to Middle America, people that haven't paid much attention to this, people who find the Russian hacking to be a bewildering labyrinth, who don't understand Russiagate. They're very distrustful. The one thing everybody can understand, the porn star, the encounter, this tawdry moment, then the desire to cover up, the payments made, the lies about the payments. This is a tawdry drama which has repeated itself scores of times. Many people have seen it happen again and again. And even if your boss tweet, you have to pay the piper. Boss tweet has now been confronted with the need to say, well, all previous statements are inoperative. And yes, Trump did pay this money, and it went through Michael Cohen. And somehow with that, you've reached a level which the other scandals don't quite accomplish. In other words, the kind of scandal that has the greatest traction because of the prevalence of soap opera as a form of everyday entertainment here, and indeed soap operas in the daytime, soap operas in the evening, soap operas everywhere, the mentality of the soap opera, everything subjective, everything individualized, nothing objective, all based on fantasies and gossip and so forth. Well, those are the ones that have legs, aren't they? Those are the ones that have traction for a lot of people. And I think this has been, in that sense, a very, very bad week for the Trump administration. And, of course, we hope that there will be many more until this entire exercise has been completed. Now, here are the things. The Trump machine is weakening. We're going to talk about the tendencies of the Republican Party towards breakup. We've got some various kinds of feuding going on, some things that are really damaging. We'll get to those. But in terms of losses, the one big loss we can see is that various tentacles of the Rupert Murdoch machine seem to have gone into a mode which is, if not exactly anti-Trump, highly critical of Trump. Rupert Murdoch. And we'll be back in just a minute. Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let us always remind you that a once a week check-in here with me is good, but 4 times during the week is certainly a lot better. And if you want to have an adequate understanding of current history in the light of previous history, then this is the place to get it. But for this, you've got to go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, check in there and tune in. Tune in between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. 1 hour, slightly more, of incisive commentary and marching orders, right? What to do, not just passive commentary, but indeed active notions of how to intervene. Americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. Now, we learn from the Michael Wolff book that Rupert Murdoch had long been very skeptical of Donald Trump, right? Rupert Murdoch, international billionaire, British Empire loyalist, media empire that the sun never sets on, always regarded Don as a kind of clown, a sort of provincial figure, much overrated and so forth. And he always expressed a certain skepticism, a certain brusque tendency to move away. This changed when the Rupert Murdoch and his previous wife began becoming friends with Jarvanka, that is Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And when they began hobnobbing, and this then led to Kushner using his friendship with Rupert Murdoch to prove to Don that he was, an important figure. And then Don, of course, begging, can't you please reintroduce me to Rupert Murdoch? Remember, during that time, right after the Brexit referendum, right, the leap in the dark, right, the probably the worst thing that happened to the British since what? Since the Munich conference, since Dunkirk, since the fall of Singapore. I'm trying to think of recent disasters of the British and their allies. You remember then, Trump was shown hobnobbing with Rupert Murdoch, and that was, for Trump, that was obviously a big thing at that golf course in Scotland. But here's what we now have. During the course of this past week, we began seeing a change of line coming out of the Rupert Murdoch empire, and both of these things surfaced on Thursday. And I think of the two, the first one is Neil Cavuto. Now, Neil Cavuto, he works for Fox News. He works for Fox Business News. Now, remember, Fox Business News is an even more primitive and barbaric version of Fox News, right? Because this is the realm of these, nativist, xenophobic ideologues, right? Lou Dobbs, imagine. That's Fox Business News. Cavuto's on there, but he also then comes on, that was Fox Business News. He comes on Fox News, just straight Fox News. Now, he has a big attack starting on Thursday, which is coming in these terms. Let me just give you some quotes. So here's Cavuto speaking to Trump. Let me be clear, Mr. President, and remember this is the Rudy Giuliani interview with Hannity was Wednesday evening. So here's now Thursday, late afternoon, evening. Here's Cavuto addressing the boss, that is Trump. Let me be clear, Mr. President. How can you drain the swamp if you're the one that keeps muddying the waters? You didn't know about that $130,000 payment to a porn star until you did. You acknowledged today that you were the guy behind the retainer payment that took care of this. You insist that money from the campaign or campaign contributions played no role in this transaction. Of that you are sure. The thing is, not 24 hours ago, sir, you couldn't recall any of this. I guess you are too busy draining the swamp to ever stop and smell the stink you are creating, Cavuto remarked. That's your doing. That's your stink, Mr. President. That's your swamp. Good night. Now, this is shocking. Having watched Cavuto for many years, going back to his days at CNBC, if there's anybody who is deferential to the forces of organized money, to individual tycoons, right, to the likes of Warren Buffett or any number of others, right, Bill Gates, he fawns on them, he worships them, he bows, he scrapes. That's Cavuto. But now, talking about the stink, this is remarkable. This is a change of line. And we now have the Wall Street Journal, a somewhat more highbrow tentacle of this force of international Rupert Murdoch propaganda, I guess. Here's their editorial published on Thursday evening, and it goes like this. Mr. Trump's public deceptions are surely relevant to his job as president, and the attempted cover-up has done greater harm than any affair would have. Stormy. Mr. Trump asked Americans, not least his supporters, to believe his claims about the payments. They were false, and conveniently so in putting the onus on Mr. Cohen. Now, as more of the story has emerged, Trump wants everyone to believe a new story that he could have told the first time around. Mr. Trump is compiling a record that increases the likelihood that few will believe him during a genuine crisis, say a dispute over speaking with General Counsel Robert Mueller. That's on already. We're in the thick of that one. Or a nuclear showdown with Kim Jong-un. Mr. Trump should worry that Americans will stop believing anything he says. Now, that's remarkable, right? Coming from the camp, the Rupert Murdoch camp, and told that the two sons have taken over. They have been, if anything, even more primitive than the elder one. Something may be changing. Big crack in the Trump machine. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. And welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Follow us every day, Monday through Thursday, via americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. Now, the attrition, the breakup, chipping away at the Trump machine, we seem to get the idea that Michael Cohen is being at least partially thrown under the bus by the Trump machine. That would be the cover story of the National Enquirer, published by a close Trump ally. And that would be the lies of Michael Cohen, right? Big front page story. What a duplicitous fellow Michael Cohen is. When we listen to the words of Rudy Giuliani saying, well, Ivanka is untouchable, but the men in this story are disposable, not even expendable, but disposable, then we get the idea that Kushner may also be gravitating farther away from the center of the machine's protection. The choice of Emmett Flood, otherwise known as that poor bastard, according to one account. That poor bastard, what did he walk into, according to one observer here in Washington, quoted on prominent cable TV. Emmett Flood, former lawyer for Dick Cheney in the Scooter Libby case, former lawyer for the polluters in the drill platform that blew up in the Gulf of Mexico, right? The BP, but he was not for BP. He was for some other party to this. He's now in there. The thing that is important, I think, though, about Emmett Flood is that his expertise in the Clinton impeachment was that he handled significant parts of the Senate side of this, which I think reinforces the assumption we've had here for a while that the Trump camp, at least, views the House of Representatives as gone, hopeless, a lost cause, and that their attempt is going to be to assemble the 34 club, any 34 senators that they think can guarantee Trump's tenure in office. If he can just keep the 34, he can be impeached, sure, by a majority of the House, but then he can't be convicted and removed and then made vulnerable to any indictment in the book. That seems to be reflected in the Emmett Flood case. We've also got a situation where Ty Cobb, the former lawyer, he's now gone. Dowd is gone. We're losing people just about every day. About half of the original White House staff, or half of whatever it's ever been, they're gone. And now we have Rudy Giuliani trying to fill the void with his uncontrollable rhetoric. Some would say his showboating, his egotism, and his manic, unstable ranting. Maybe we should sample a little bit of that, because it's not adequate to say that the only thing that went on in that interview with Hannity was to say, yes, Trump reimbursed the money, $130,000, through the retainer of Michael Cohen. There's been a correction about this, that it was a personal payment, that he was commenting on the timing, but that was not Trump's thinking, and that he actually says the firing of Comey was under his Article 1 powers. I think it's Article 2 that's about the president, isn't it? I'll have to check. But what does Hannity say? That Comey is perverted, that he's a pathological liar, that the investigation is tainted. Comey leaks to prosecutors. Interestingly, Rudy describes the FBI agents taking part in the Cohen operations as stormtroopers. He thinks that no interview should be allowed between Trump and the Mueller group. Trump cannot be distracted. Written answers at most. As far as Sessions goes, he likes Sessions, but what Sessions has done is not good. To Hillary, Rudy says, sorry, Hillary, you are a criminal. And if Ivanka becomes a target, the nation will turn against Mueller, and there'll be some kind of a rebellion. He's got all kinds of choice words for Strzok and Page, for Comey, as we've heard, for McCabe. Giuliani says the answer to all of this would have been Attorney General Giuliani. He claims that he had the offer from Trump. He should have taken it. He rused the day. And therefore, Sessions would not have even been there. The answer to Sessions would be not to have him. McCabe, out of the McCabe investigation, Giuliani concludes, no Steele dossier with compromat, no FISA. That the FISA is based on the dossier. Wrong. 7 independent countries. Let's see if we can reel them off. United Kingdom, Australia, France, Germany, Poland, Estonia, and the Netherlands all reported unusual, suspicious contacts between Trump officials and Russian KGB, GRU, SVR representatives. And then there were 3 FISA renewals. What a scandal. Anyway, you get the idea. This is an unhinged performance. It shocked the the White House, shock and dismay spread in the White House, an elaborate castle of falsehoods and lies erected over many months, swept away in a very, very short period of time by this performance by Giuliani. So we also have this week a tremendous watershed, and it occurred sometime in the beginning of March when the Trump lawyers begin to tell Mueller at one of these preliminary conferences, we will not allow Trump to be interviewed by you. The Mueller team said, well, we have another option, which is to issue a grand jury subpoena and compel that testimony, of course, under conditions that are less favorable to the, can I say, defendant, to the subject, to the recipient of the subpoena, at the very least. Yes, all that. And that obviously has been a big watershed. We're always told that the big watershed has been the raid on Cohen, I guess, given the relationship. But the threat of a subpoena to Don himself, I think that's going to be even bigger. So here's the other thing, though. Trump today appearing at the jamboree of the National Rifle Association, right? Addressing the gun lobby. He's reported to, well, I've heard him. He's boasting about what went on in the federal court in Alexandria. And what was it? We'll tell you in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in very summery kind of Washington, D.C. Now, across the river, not up the river yet, but across the river in Alexandria, of course, we have the famous Eastern District of Virginia, also known as the Rocket Docket. It's a very specific group of federal judges. One of them is Thomas Selby Ellis III. Thomas Selby Ellis III. Now, where's this Ellis? How do we know this name? Well, you know that there's this former governor of Florida by the name of Jeb Bush. But the Jeb Bush is actually an abbreviation, an elision. His full name is John Ellis Bush. J-E-B, Jeb, hence Jeb Bush. The answer, the situation comes down to the fact that the sister of Bush the Elder, that is the now ailing and aged and widower George H.W. Bush, right? I've written about him. Go take a look, tarpley.net. Order that biography. You should read it. Absolutely. You can also read it for free on there. And then you're going to want a print copy because you never know what happens in today's world. But the sister of President Bush the Elder, and that is to say the daughter of Senator Prescott Bush and his very draconian wife. So this is Nancy Bush, Nancy Walker Bush. She married a certain Alexander Ellis, and the result is that Nancy Walker Bush Ellis became this is the way the Ellis, the alliance between the Bush family and the Ellis family came together. Now that's just important background, right? We're not able to deduce from that any particular outcome, just that the federal judge here in Alexandria, Virginia is none other than Judge Thomas Selby Ellis III. So he's there presiding over the trial of Manafort, or the pretrial motions for the Manafort trial over there in Alexandria, Virginia. So Manafort tried to argue that the Office of the Special Counsel was not legit that he had no right and that he should go home and let Manafort off. Today, it's a sort of a follow-up on that, with Manafort already in a much weakened and, of course, a tragically weakened position for him. So Ellis engaged in what I think is a sort of a covering exercise, and it's also the fact that by now he's well over 70, and he's got to be something of a curmudgeon. In other words, some kind of, one of the, you can put him in the grumpy old men series. So here's how it goes. Ellis is addressing Michael Dreeben. Michael Dreeben he's been essentially acting as Solicitor General of the United States, or deputy, arguing cases at the Supreme Court. This guy knows the appellate rounds, and he knows the Supreme Court. So Dreeben is part of the Mueller team, along with these stalwarts like Weissman and, of course, Mueller himself. So what we hear then from Judge Ellis is, you really don't care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. You really care about getting information Mr. Manafort can give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump and lead to his prosecution or impeachment. Ellis goes on, the government wants Manafort, in the vernacular, to sing, and the Mueller people are trying to, quote, turn the screws and get the information they really want. Well, dear Judge, how many times have you seen this before? Isn't this the stuff of everyday federal prosecutions? If you don't like that, you probably ought to be supporting some kind of a reform agenda, and we often would, although in this case we're glad that some of these draconian laws are there. So the argument from Manafort is that Mueller specifically should not be the guy in charge of this, and it should be thrown out. Now, the judge is not going to go that far. The argument from Dreeben is, in trying to understand the actions of Mr. Manafort in Ukraine and the associations he had with Russian individuals and the depths of those financial relationships, we had to follow the money where it led, whither it led, maybe. And the argument was that, this is a weak argument, but saying Manafort was already under investigation in Alexandria before the special prosecutor came along. In other words, the feds were after Manafort sooner. Why aggregate that into the hands of Mueller? So this is a very narrow technical argument, and the thing is, could be separated, right? In other words, Ellis at one point says, well, if you're not going to be probed by Mueller, we're going to send you back to the Eastern District of Virginia, the normal U.S. attorney, the normal rocket docket, we might say. Ellis says, yeah, okay, some of the charges involved in purported conduct that occurred over a decade ago, but no ruling on the Manafort lawyer's motion to dismiss. No ruling. He says, even without a connection, the Mueller people may well still have the authority to bring the charges against Manafort. I'm not saying it's illegitimate, says Ellis. So there are various kinds of chaff thrown out by the Manafort people. And Dreeben says, no, our investigation has considerably advanced and deepened our understanding. The judge demanded an unredacted, unexpurgated, uncensored version of the Rosenstein memos, because there's one from last May and one from last August. Downing wants a copy too. We have a separate affair going on where Republican members of the House are widely reputed, according to published accounts, widely reputed of having gotten information about where the probe was going and then funneling that down to the Trump people. Ellis is he has a reputation, according to some, of being especially tough on the side that's going to win. In other words, he wants to show that he's a straight arrow, that he doesn't play favorites, so he beats you up as a prelude to ruling in your favor. In other words, if he's very nice to you, that's when you have to watch out, because that's when you've got to expect him to overrule what you want. The American people feel pretty strongly about no one having unfettered power, says the valiant Judge Ellis. And Dreeben says, look, we don't have any unfettered power. We're a part of the Justice Department. We're subject to oversight, meaning Rosenstein, the tax division, and the National Security Division agree with what we're saying about Manafort. We don't have unfettered power. Ellis is known to be tough on attorneys in court, writes the Washington Post, but those who have appeared before him often say that pressure offers little insight into his ultimate ruling. His interactions with counsel in the courtroom do not necessarily reflect where he will end up, says Timothy Belovets, former prosecutor, lawyer, quoted by the Washington Post. So that's where we are. No ruling, nothing to take home, nothing to put in the bank for the Trump camp. Back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., reminding you, follow us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. Now, a couple of items left over from the first hour. Trump did indeed address the National Rifle Association Jamboree down in Texas. In the course of this, he recognized as one of his local allies, Ted Cruz, and it sounded to me like Ted Cruz got booed. Not such a good sign. We've also got the interesting fact that the guy on Manafort's staff, who allegedly represented the link to the GRU, or maybe it's the SVR, this guy Kilimnik, this character has now fled from Ukraine to Russia. So the idea being you're not going to get any testimony from him. Now, in terms of the splintering of the Trump machine, let's just go through a couple of things. Father Conroy, the Jesuit fired by Ayn Rand Ryan, the pagan, is making a comeback. He's making a comeback. And the statement that he made coming back says that he was told by Ryan's chief of staff that it was time for a chaplain who would not be a Catholic. Oh, that pesky Catholic social doctrine, otherwise known as Christianity. It's scriptural. It's apostolic. You can't get around it. You want Christianity, you're going to have this preferential option for the poor. But Ryan doesn't like that because it interferes with the Ayn Rand paganism, right? That the poor are really the villains of the piece. So Donahue of the Catholic League, this is an important group. The Catholic League is demanding that Ryan's chief of staff get fired for having done this. So Conroy is coming back, and he's going to be preaching, and we'll be listening to what he says. It's going to be very, very interesting. We're also told now that the Democratic Party is mobilizing to go to appeal to the remorse of trade unionists who made the mistake of voting for Trump. Trump has lost 15 points, 15 points among trade union workers and households, especially in the Middle West. His support there has gone from 62%, a pretty healthy majority, down to 47%, already a minority. And we're told that the sentiment among union households is 47% in these coming congressional elections, 47% want to see a Democratic Congress and 34% only the Republicans. That round of and one of the trade unionists quoted in this interesting article says, well, we've seen it. This is the guy from the United Auto Workers, the UAW. Trump is for the rich. Good. Better late than never to come to that understanding. We're also told that in Arizona, the teachers have won at least some of their demands, right? We've been having this now in Kentucky, in Colorado, in West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona. Arizona, 20% pay increase over 3 years. And all of these things are gut-wrenching for the local Republican Koch Alec machine, right? The austerity regime that has been going on. And we're going to hopefully have time to say more about this, but if we don't, you've got to get The Nation magazine, and they're a very interesting article about how the U.S. Postal Service is already being strangled in rural America. In rural America, the Postal Service is already collapsing. Cutbacks have created a labor shortage at smaller post offices, and mail carriers are struggling to do their jobs. Now, this is not just a normal full-time letter carrier, but it's going to be these rural delivery people, and this is a really grim scene that's going on out there, and it's very hard to get people to keep these jobs because here. A dozen rural carriers who spoke that we interviewed for this article described the consequences of the labor shortage. Their routes have gotten longer and more packages have filled the backs of their cars, keeping them out past dark on unlit, poorly marked, poorly maintained roads. We get one very close to the Canadian border. They've all been called on during their days off, ordered to work unfamiliar routes in far-off towns. They work double-length pay days for no extra pay, and it's a grave threat to one of the country's most essential institutions. Remember, if you voted for Trump, you're a fool, because his attempt is going to be to privatize the Postal Service and take that immense pot of money, those billions put in there by Hastert and his Republican cohort, so that when they privatize it, the sweet center, right, the prize in the middle will be all those billions that these oligarchs can then loot. So take a look at the U.S. Postal Service. Without the Postal Service, the rural economy, the small town economy are dead ducks. And therefore, there's another reason. I must say this article is not very good in identifying the Hastert poison pill, right? Prepaying all the pension and medical care costs, right? 5 years every 1 year. It's just crazy. And of course, the losses in personnel have been extreme. Anyway, we are great champions. We already had a story from Rolando, the head of the letter carriers, this week, focusing right on that Hastert poison pill. And therefore, this is a big sleeper issue. Right? Retail apocalypse means depression, obviously, but it also means you can't get anything. It's got to come through the mail. And what if the Postal Service breaks down? And these proposals, again, the two cardinal points is no privatization of the Veterans Administration and no privatization of the U.S. Postal Service. What else do we have? Exchange of compliments among various Republican candidates. This guy Blankenship, the ex-con in West Virginia, the coal baron who spent a year in the federal pen, is out there attacking Cocaine Mitch. This is apparently the new Roy Moore, and this time he's attacking Mitch because of his wife Elaine and her Taiwanese Chinese family connections. What you're getting is the Republican Party is not going to be the bastion of petty bourgeois respectability and decorum. It's going to be a storm cellar for ex-convicts and felons. We have Grimm in Staten Island running again for the Congress after his own stay in federal confinement. And, of course, Arpaio, who was judged guilty of contempt of court until pardoned. So Blankenship, Grimm, Arpaio, the Bagmen. How about that? B-A-G. Now, in terms of, Pruitt, the other gift that keeps on giving. The word now is that the Trump administration thinks that Pruitt's staff may have tried to plant and inspire detrimental stories about other cabinet officials. I think they see Zinke in order to take the heat off Pruitt, and Pruitt is therefore obviously on borrowed time, but he seems to be totally impudent and shameless. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So many crimes, so little time. What we ought to be aware of is, in terms of some of this stuff, the arguments now coming from the Trump supporters on the theoretical plane, constitutional theory concerning impeachment and indeed indictment, are now beginning to imitate the Nixon camp. Remember, in his infamous interview with David Frost, May 1977, so 3 years after leaving office, Richard Nixon states, quote, "When the president does it, that means it is not illegal," says Nixon to Frost, May 1977, the first of many self-orchestrated comebacks. Now, the book I'm looking at here, Stanley Cutler's Wars of Watergate, the definitive study, at least on the surface, and I stress that, he says this is only referring to the political crimes, not things like the Ellsberg break-in. The break-in to the Ellsberg psychiatrist's office is already September 1971. This is even before Watergate gets going in grand style. Right? That's June 72 with the DNC break-ins. But, we're hearing the same sort of thing. Now, the broad assertion that Nixon has that the president can do anything and it's legal, that is, of course, an echo of Ulpian, the legal theoretician of the Roman Empire. The famous line is, quid principi placuit vigorum legis habet. What pleases the prince has the force of law. And the answer to that is no, not in America, dear friend. It cannot be done. There's no such thing as a power without a limit. Whatever power you're trying to assert, prerogative, pardon, firing, whatever it is, there's got to be a limit. And the limit is generally the corrupt intent and potentially criminal conduct. Now, this issue is being argued by the wife of Joseph DeGenoa, right? Joseph DeGenoa argues this, and so does his charming wife, Victoria Tonsing. And she says, essentially, the president can pardon anybody he wants, anytime he wants, for any reason he wants, and it doesn't matter. Or he can fire any executive branch official for any reason, anytime, no reason, doesn't matter. So it's a narrower claim. It says when it comes to firing or pardoning, this is the exclusive prerogative of the unchecked, absolute, unlimited power of the president. Well, this is an alien to the entire U.S. system. What's the limit? And the limit is if you're doing this with the corrupt intent for obstruction of justice, then that will not be kosher. Sorry. So this is what they're reduced to, and we'll be seeing in the coming weeks and months and perhaps more, the increasing convergence of the Trump camp arguments with the Nixon and indeed unitary executive arguments coming from the neocons and the reactionaries. Now, we've got to point out, Veselnitskaya, right? Already a week ago, we had the Russian government lawyer, as described by Goldstone in those emails to Don Trump Jr., Veselnitskaya already portrayed there as a Russian government lawyer. In her interview with Richard Engel on NBC last Friday, said, "I am an informant of the Russian judicial authorities." It means Yuri Chaika, the top state prosecutor, the supreme state prosecutor of the Russian Federation. And I'm calling him the modern equivalent of the Grand Inquisitor. He is, in effect, the modern version of Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor that we read about in the Brothers Karamazov and elsewhere. So, Veselnitskaya. Previously, she had said, no, I'm just a private person. I'm just an average person. I'm not the government. I'm just me. Now she says, since 2013, she has been working in close collaboration with the Yuri Chaika state prosecutor's office. This is an important change, and it's shocking that it hasn't been more discussed. So let's us say a couple words about it. I would say this has to be construed as an escalation of possible blackmail and extortion coming from the Russian authorities vis-a-vis the Oval Office here in the U.S. And this means blackmail. We may soon enough find out what was the accuracy of the Christopher Steele dossier, including the scabrous part, right, the salacious part, as they say, the exercise in undinism by various professional ladies in that Moscow hotel. That entire thing, that remains quite possibly as a sword of Damocles, and I would have to interpret Madame Veselnitskaya's statement as a kind of way to recall, to remind certain people here in Washington that this stuff exists, that they have some stuff, and that therefore you better watch out. So therefore you've got to start looking at the conduct of the Oval Office, the administration in general. Is this spontaneous American policymaking, however deranged and misguided, or is this the fruit of some kind of blackmail and extortion? This is the question that we're left with. Now, the Trump regime right now is on track to bust up the most important part of the Western alliance, and actually we think Japan is extremely important, and the allies out there in the Pacific, very, very important. We're for those alliances in today's chaotic world. Don't give them up under these circumstances, maybe at some other time, but not now. NATO, the crisis of NATO, and it comes from two things. One is this very, very ill-advised, abortive, unprepared, unsupported stuff about a tariff on steel and aluminum. And we've just had the team of Mnuchin, Ross, Lighthizer, and Navarro traveling to China, coming back now, and we'll see what it is they negotiated. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So again, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, the great forecloser, Wilbur Ross, the bottom feeder, Lighthizer, the trade rep, and Navarro, the xenophobic ideologue. We have some sympathy with some of his arguments, but not in general. So it's a team of rivals. They have to go together, right? These four horsemen of the trade war, I guess we'd have to call them, have to go to China and negotiate, because each one fundamentally mistrusts the other. It's a war of all against all, even in this delegation, and therefore the totalitarian united Chinese from the Xi dynasty, they're going to defeat them because the U.S. side doesn't know what they want. What's the demand? Is there 2 or 3 demands that are going to be made? So the European Union is saying that the attempt to impose steel and aluminum tariffs using this national security emergency is false and illegal, and therefore to impose those on Europe, European Union, but also Canada and Mexico is illegal. Now, right now, we've got another 30-day delay on this. The European argument goes like this. We are Europe. We have 500 million people. You can't just throw this away. And the main argument is Trump and company start distinguishing between friend and foe. And we of Europe, especially NATO Europe, we're your friends. But if you insist on going through with this, there will be retaliation. Made easier because Trump is so widely hated in Europe, right? So unilateralism, go it alone, no allies, that runs up against tremendous difficulties very quickly. Where is Bannon, the great theoretician of all this stuff? Now, we would say, of course, trade deficit with China, that's a real issue. So find a way that tries to assemble a coalition of like-minded powers, that is to say, the Trans-Pacific Partnership countries, plus the European Union, plus some others, and have at the Chinese, yes, and do it in a way that's specifically tailored. And if you want to bring back certain American industries, you need more than just a tariff. You've got to have credit. You've got to have training. You've got to have a whole series of measures that tax breaks, all sorts of things, right? Build some infrastructure to make these factories come alive again. That can all be done. The U.S. demands, of course, are correct. There should not be forcible, coerced technology transfer. Drop the industrial espionage, China. Drop the other sorts of abuses that you've been doing. But you've got the Europeans now in a foul mood because of this stuff. And then the next step. Last week we saw Macron come here, keep the Iran nuclear accord, the JCPOA. Merkel, same story, keep the Iran nuclear accord. Now, we've had the counterblast from Netanyahu, which is to dig up some documents found in an abandoned garage, I guess, or more likely hacked out of the offices of the International Atomic Energy Agency, saying Iran lies. Well, the answer to that is this entire Iran nuclear accord is based on the certitude of Iran lying. At least this is the story told by the supporters of this deal. And we support the deal, although we don't share necessarily this argument. But the old saying popularized by Reagan in his meetings with Gorbachev, doveryai no proveryai, or something like that. Trust but verify, as Kerry pointed out tirelessly, this time around there's no trust. There's only verify, the most intrusive, the most stringent, the most demanding kinds of verification, inspection, and so forth. That's what this is. Stuff you'll probably never get from little Kim out there in Pyongyang. So what is this? It's just obviously a kind of ego obsession. Promise made has to be promise kept. The whole Netanyahu thing is pitched, as we said, at the 4th grade level to impress Trump. He brought it to Fox and Friends. We've now got Pompeo and Bolton in action. And as we have pointed out, there is a standing plan, or standing design to go into a Middle East war which is, it corresponds to the wishes of Netanyahu, of Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Bolton, the Walrus, and Pompeo Minimo, and Kushner, who I think would support anything for any country that had some ready cash to lend. So we're now headed towards that. So there's going to be a two-pronged NATO crisis as we go towards the summer NATO summit, and it's going to be, one is the useless provocation and ill will embodied in these tariff policies, right, which are just, they don't amount to anything. The cost-benefit analysis is overwhelmingly negative for doing these things. And then this other question, are you really going to go out of your way to offend everybody in the European leadership group there by saying, no, we're going to repudiate this deal? Now, concerning North Korea, notice the Fox line, and there's unfortunately still the pro-Trump part of Fox, the majority still, is that they have completely incorporated Nobel Peace Prize for Don Trump bringing peace in our time, right? In other words, the classic Sir Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich, this paper that I have signed by you-know-who is going to lead to peace in our time. That's now the Fox line. Peace in our time, and Trump gets the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is a path towards disaster, I would say. It's potentially catastrophic, given the ego dynamics, the weakness of this ego and its need for affirmation, and then the inability to deal with an obvious reverse or failure for which the responsibility can only go to Trump. That's going to cause some kind of a breakdown, lashing out, and then, God help us, the bloody nose or some other half-baked lunatic idea proposed by Bolton and Pompeo. That's where this seems to go. The general finding, reported by the London Economist, is that the real desire of Netanyahu and these people around Trump, it has really very little to do with the Iran nuclear accord. It's the idea there should be no accord of any kind with Iran. The only thing to do with Iran would be regime change. That's ultimately what they want. And we've had a dignified statement made by Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif this week, saying if you really insist on this, then we'll have to respond, right? If you don't want to be bound by this, then we won't either. All of this absolute folly, and this is where the question of impeachment becomes urgent in terms of the time frame. That is to say, impeachment is not just about past violations of statute or past political crimes. It becomes a means of avoiding future harm, future disasters, future catastrophes, future debacle. Okay? That's where we are right now. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Here's another one, though, that we should mention. We know that Trump fawns on Xi whenever he gets a chance. We've now got examples of Chinese military operating from their base in Djibouti, that is to say, on the shores of the Red Sea, very strategic choke point, right, headed up the Red Sea towards the Suez Canal. The Chinese have implanted themselves there, and they're now trying to blind American pilots with lasers. This was something the Soviets did at certain points in the late Cold War, but this is really serious stuff, right? Because, of course, a modern laser, even a fairly small one, can cause temporary blindness and can cause plane crashes with hundreds of victims. Now, one last thing. Britain, we want the fall of May. This is now possibly in the cards, right? We have the Home Secretary, Police Minister, Amber Rudd quitting. And the issue here was something called Windrush. Windrush was a ship that came to Britain in 1948, carrying people from Jamaica and the Caribbean, right? In 1948, the British had a labor shortage. They put out an appeal inviting people from the Caribbean. It's very instructive. When your labor market is so tight and you don't have a labor force, you've got to bring people in. So this program went on from 1948 to 1971. All kinds of people were cordially invited to come. They were benefactors of the British. And Amber Rudd, trying to play to xenophobic nativist sentiments, right, in this Brexit regime, said, well, what we'll do is we'll go back to the Windrush people, and probably they all won't have the proper paperwork, because the British were letting everybody in. And we'll then, if we find they don't have the proper paperwork, we can throw them out, we can deport them, and then we can boast about that so the various reactionaries will like us. So the British people, having been sold the xenophobic argument, are now to some degree recoiling in horror and disgust at the antics of Amber Rudd and this awful May regime. There are some regional elections there that are going to be bad for May, and we hope they're very bad. Of course, remember, the Trump regime wants to expel 57,000 Honduran refugees from the U.S. Now, culture. We're big supporters of Michelle Wolf. We think that the people who are attacking Michelle Wolf are Philistines. Look that up. Matthew Arnold, many others writing about Philistines, people with no culture, no appreciation, no understanding. And as far as the press association there, the White House correspondents, I can remember when we had David Gregory of NBC dancing with Karl Rove as a means of trying to humanize the Bush regime. So they have been all over the map. It's high time that they exercised critical attention, right, in this case to the Trump regime. Now, in terms of some other cultural points, well, one is Kanye West seems to be destroying the business interests of the Kardashian family, and they're reported to be extremely upset about his ill-advised and obviously very confused statements. But here's the thing. The attention to the 25th Amendment and Russiagate. We've talked before about the valiant attempt by the makers of the Homeland series to delve into the question of Russian active measures, Russiagate, the Gerasimov Doctrine, hybrid warfare, and so forth. And what they've done on the Homeland series is to show an assassination attempt against the U.S. president, when then the Russian intervention is to arrange the elimination, the assassination in turn of one of the people convicted in this, do it in such a way that it could be blamed on the White House by using the services of a Russian agent, a provocateur, GRU captain, although on the surface she looks French. And then in an altercation between the FBI and a group of armed survivalists, libertarians, and others, to try to spread the impression that one of the libertarians and survivalists had been shot and wounded, but then left to die. And then finally an attempt to use senators, one senator in particular, Sam Paley, as a useful idiot to try to destabilize the presidency of the President Elizabeth Keene. This is all very, very interesting, and it shows the effect of the what we've learned about the Gerasimov Doctrine and hybrid warfare. So in the middle of this, the 25th Amendment comes up. The 25th Amendment is activated by the Vice President and the Cabinet, but then when the main Russian agent, the GRU captain involved, this woman, Matahari operative, in addition to everything else, she's brought back. The covert operation successfully brings her back. She testifies in the Congress, and the entire series of lies about this president, they collapse as a result of this testimony. So the 25th Amendment shown at work. This is the way people find out about the 25th Amendment. Now, also, in one of the recent issues of Designated Survivor, this is on ABC, right? This is easier to get. You can get it off broadcast, right, from week to week. Kiefer Sutherland and company. But in this one, it's the death of the president's wife puts him into a period of temporary depression. Clearly, we have to assume pro-Russian forces get the tapes of his interview with his psychiatrist. This is then published, broadcast, and then a group of members of the cabinet decide they're going to exercise the 25th Amendment. Now, in this case, in the Designated Survivor, the working of the 25th Amendment is presented in a way that's simply wrong. It's not necessarily a hearing in front of the cabinet, although that might be possible. But once the 25th Amendment is invoked, and this the Homeland gets this part right, if you try to oust the president by having the cabinet and the vice president say you're unfit for office, president turns around and says, no, I'm not, I'm staying, then that goes to the Congress, and it takes 2/3 of each house, 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and that makes it harder than the normal impeachment. But still, it's something that the initiative can come from inside the cabinet, from Pence and a majority of the cabinet. Now, the other one is this interesting series on CBS All Access. It's called The Good Fight. And here we have the case of a law firm, progressive, I guess. In walks a young Russian woman and says, I am one of those prostitutes, in effect, who took part in the undonism, right, the soiling of the bed in the hotel. I'm now here in the U.S., and forces in the FBI are trying to get me deported. Various forces are trying to get me deported. So the law firm helps her to avoid it. But now what we're seeing is aspects of Russiagate, the Steele Dossier, the 25th Amendment, impeachment, and all the rest. These are now getting into popular culture in such a way that the average person can be educated about these things, at least at a minimal level. Now, we would have all kinds of disagreements, disputes, as I say, the factual one on the mishandling of the 25th Amendment designated survivor, but still, these are signs of a progress of understanding that many, many millions of people can take part in. And with that, we have come to the end of this broadcast of World Crisis Radio. We'll see you at the American System at Monday at 9 p.m.